Good afternoon, colleagues. We have then before us here to... the mic, yes, is on. And that's on. You can't hear me? Hello? Oh, okay, I have to get closer. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone. At your request, we are in the Committee of the Whole, so that then, because there were many questions for various bills that we have on our agenda that are all coming from one funding source, and many of you also have seen a letter that was sent to Senator Respicio from, of course, Senator Chris Duenas. We've asked that members of the administration from the financial side to be here this afternoon, and we have with us, of course, a former colleague of ours, Senator Tony Blas, who's with us. Now, yeah, you're right, so you guys know the rules in here, so, okay. And I'm not going to set up a lot of rules here in terms of how, we want to proceed with this, but the only thing I would like to do is to start off with the primary authors of, the bills, and we have about, I think, 5 maybe from Senator Uggan, and then we have 2 from Senator Underwood. We also had asked is that based on where maybe the savings you wanted them to go to, that you were also at liberty to invite anyone that you want as well to be present this afternoon. So, but just to let you know that was, you were given that opportunity to do that. So if it's okay with everyone, we'll go ahead and start with Senator Uggan, at least to start off. And then, I'd like to also recognize then the Vice Speaker as the Chair of OFB, and then I'll open it up with everyone else. Senator Uggan, did you want to defer first to OFB? Is that what you're... No, so you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and Senators, fellow colleagues, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. First and foremost, I want to stand, I guess I'm seated at the moment. I want to sit here and commend the fiscal team and Governor Calvo, fellow senators, for your efforts in making sure that you're able to make our people whole by virtue of paying their tax refunds. And we understand the tool that is available to the governor and to the executive branch in terms of identifying where cash is and making sure that that obligation is met. So I certainly recognize that particular component. My first question would be in reference to setting aside the budget that was allocated and adopted by this body for fiscal year 16. I know that the governor's proposal initially anticipated an additional $37 million above what the fiscal year 16 level is in terms of the public law. So based on that particular projection, do you still stand with those anticipated additional revenues? And this is just a general question as it applies with not taking into account what was adopted by the body.
Senator, we're a few weeks into the fiscal year. The governor had made several presentations today. He does stand by the number that he had sent down in his budget request. It's very difficult this early in the process to declare any tracking. However, we remain confident that we could and most likely will realize the original appropriate or the original levels that the governor had sent down. However, I want to be clear that the governor has directed through a cabinet meeting and other correspondence to all of his directors to live within the budget that was passed and to do whatever it takes to plan for a full 12-month budget, not a budget to expend resources in hopes or anticipation of additional monies being appropriated from the legislature. So while we are confident and we feel very strong with our numbers that we sent down, we will not spend in any other way than in the way the budget was passed, and we've directed the cabinet to do like.
And
as such.
thank you very much. I certainly applaud Governor Calvo for making that statement on several occasions, as you noted, living within the confines of the budget that was adopted, because obviously that's the law of the land at this point in time for this fiscal year. Now, my follow-on question is, and first of all, you both have sat in this arena, and you understand the nature and the responsibility of this body in terms of if, in fact, any additional revenues come into the government of Guam during the course of a fiscal year, the responsibility of the body, aside from already what was allocated and set aside for tax refunds through the budget process, that this body rightfully has the authority to be able to appropriate that based on either the governor's recommendation or whatever this body wishes, and however this body wishes to expend those resources. Now, my question is, because we are here to discuss the $1.5 million realized savings by virtue of the consolidation of the 2007 and 2009 bond. Now, if based on the original anticipated increase in revenues, and if in fact those revenues are realized based on the original budget that was submitted by the governor, would the administration be able to reimburse the savings component so that it can be appropriated in accordance with the provisions provided, the allocations that is presently before this body?
Senator, we'd be willing to work with you on that. We want to draw back to the intent of the bill as passed and to Public Law 3360. What we would caution is, and we have several senators, one I believe particularly the chairman on health, that had been a strong advocate, in fact worked with BBMR originally when this type of legislation was introduced. And it's very clear in 3360 that the appropriation that was desired was for capital improvements to the Guam Memorial Hospital. Now,
and let me, senators,
sure.
I apologize for interjecting, but let me come back to that particular point because you're leading to that. And yes, this body has made a decision consistent with what the chairman on health had wanted. And the commencement of those allocations and set aside for capital improvement projects for GMH commences in fiscal year 16. And that was just part of the deliberation and the discussion in this body when we were entertaining the refinancing of the bonds, is that beginning fiscal year 16, in accordance with the chair of health and his desire to allocate those resources directly to GMH, that we will set that aside specifically to address what you were alluding to a little earlier. So this body stood by that recommendation, that suggestion by the chair of health, recognizing the requirements at GMH. It was specifically discussed but not placed in the budget, the anticipated savings for 15, because if you recall, even the governor recognized that there were some authorizations in the budget proposal that he had forwarded on July 30th to this body to consider. And those were some of the items. And incidentally, I did extract a few of those appropriation measures specifically because the governor's office and the fiscal team are working on addressing a few of those. So I pulled back a couple of those measures, and then also the chair of the Committee on Appropriations also had addressed the farmers' compensation in the fiscal year 16 budget. So those are the two measures that I had extracted. And now we are looking at $587,000. Should there be an understanding here, and should this body decide to proceed with the adoption of these measures, would allocate $587,000 directly to our people, to the Fallen Heroes Monument, to the repair of a gymnasium that was damaged during Super Typhoon or Typhoon Dolphin, that unfortunately the community no longer has access or any use of at this point in time, to repair the Umatic Bridge, which the mayor has reached out to members of this body and requested on many, many occasions, and only recently did we start hearing about bricks falling off of that particular bridge, which could pose a safety hazard to our residents and also to our visitors. And then also the allocation of $150,000 to support a project that Governor Calvo, through GURA, had endorsed and specifically spoke very, very well at the groundbreaking, recognizing that it's going to give back to the community, and that 150 would augment what GURA was able to provide, a little bit in excess of $500,000. So these are all community projects that members of our community have asked. And that's why I ask you specifically that should the revenues reflect positively and increase according to, if not near, the original numbers that were submitted by the governor, if the governor as well as your fiscal team will be able to reimburse the 1.5 or whatever final numbers is agreed upon, so that we can address some of these issues. And I specifically enumerated a number of them. So I asked you that, and I appreciate you being open-minded, keeping an open mind in terms of should the revenues increase. Yes, we will work with the members of this legislature, not necessarily myself, but members of the legislature, so that we can address some of these community projects. Because the reality is, one is paying back to our heroes, our military heroes who made the ultimate sacrifice. Another is literally, or two others are literally, three others, I apologize, literally working with the mayor so that we can get some of these facilities completed and back in full use for our people. So I thank you very much, Senator, for being open to discussing this, and should the revenues, additional revenues above and beyond the projected revenues be realized, then you're open to reimbursing the 1.5 or endorsing the expenditure in some of these projects, as the governor did through his authorization on July 30th, his legislation. Thank you very much, Senators. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sure, Senator, and if I may, it's important for the body to know as well. The reason why we were concerned about the original intent of the bill was because we wanted to present to the legislature that there are no savings in 2016. It's a skip year in terms of the way that the Angita had let the good Senator Underwood know this, so that we thought, okay, if there's a bill introduced with the intent and the spirit within for the hospital, we would roll with that. And then when that didn't happen and we saw the other bills introduced, we said, well, and because I'm getting to where you are, Senator, that we would go ahead and pay tax refunds. And the only concern that we have, and we'll put it on the record here now, that if that's the way you pass the bills, that we don't get criticized then for deficit spending, because it would be in excess of the current budget that you passed. So if the bills recognize that is the recognition that it would be in excess of the budget as passed and lapsed into law, then we would have no problem with that, because then we won't be stuck with deficit spending over and above what the actual appropriations called for. But we're very open. In fact, the governor made a presentation to mayors today, the Mayor's Council, that he is in full support of all the measures that you've put forward.
And I thank you very much for making that statement. I think it, and correct me if I'm mistaken in terms of how the legislation may proceed, is looking at the government of Guam. Should additional revenues above and beyond the projection be realized, that you would reimburse the 1.5, the approximately 1.5, reimburse that particular savings, which would ultimately be appropriated through these measures? Or are you saying, by virtue of fiscal year 2016, anything above, now we're looking at pre-allocating? Because I would rather go the route of reimbursing the savings that was realized, so that in fact you can work with it with your fiscal team.
Senator, I think that this would probably be a step in the direction of maybe some of the other shortfalls that may occur. We don't know at this point. We're gonna run the budget the way it was passed. Of course, that's what we have to do by law. So we were thinking that, and the governor is on the record today at the Mayor's Council today saying that if there is a revisit from the legislature for any funding measures to provide appropriations for additional projects within the fiscal year, we would certainly take it into consideration under your appropriation authority. And if you appropriate it and we concur, then certainly we will fund those projects, Senator.
And you do, and I will also say this for the record, working with the Chair of Appropriations, that should the revenues exceed the existing budget law, then certainly I'm open to looking at expending or reappropriating those resources, either in accordance with recommendations coming from the Chief Executive, recommendations identified and needs identified by the Chair of Appropriations or members of this body. So I'm certainly open to dialoguing, so that in fact we get some of these resources out there, either to our government agencies, such as public safety agencies, that we recognize that there's been public pronouncements about or appropriations not being sufficient, but from my perspective, appropriations were above fiscal year 15's level. Now, ideally, obviously, if additional revenues come in, then I would anticipate that public safety, as well as healthcare, as well as education,
Right.
would continue to be priority. So, Senator, I thank you for that open comment, and I certainly appreciate your perspective. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
And that's what we were trying to say. We wouldn't want to say that this would be the automatic, priority, because who knows, the health chair might say, no, the hospital is a priority, or the public safety chair might say, no, the public safety is above these projects. So we'll work with you, though, and in light of any potential shortfalls, we definitely want to work with you to fund these projects.
Senator Underwood, as the other primary sponsor again of about 3 other bills.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to, first of all, clarify why I had introduced Bill 18233, which is to appropriate $250,000 to the University of Guam, and Bill 183-33, which is to appropriate $500,000 to the Department of Education for its operations. You know, as of today, University of Guam had sent me a letter that they are $4.5 million in the hole because they have not received cash from their 2015 budget. And the Department of Education likewise had sent me a letter that they have yet to receive approximately $5.9 million, and they are that much in the hole for their operations. So I was hoping that by the time we would have gotten to this point that there would have been some kind of relief provided to them. As you notice, I had just appropriated, we had initially included University of Guam and appropriated $1 million from the anticipated savings from the bond refinancing in the fiscal year 2016 budget. But we were informed that the savings will not be realized for 2016. And because of the anticipated accreditation visit, which is really important to the University of Guam this spring, then they said, can you at least give us $250,000 because we need to make sure that the air conditioning units and the ducts are replaced for the health and safety of our students in those classrooms. So I went ahead and then submitted this bill to appropriate $250,000 to address those needs for University of Guam. And I appropriated the $500,000 for operations, which would help meet the Every Child is Entitled to an Adequate Education Act, in which there are health and safety issues that have to be addressed within DOE as well. So when we held the public hearing on these 2 bills, I did receive from Mr. Blas, you did submit a written testimony citing to me at that point that while he had noted that the intention is laudable for this bill, my Public Law 3360 clearly had stated that the intent is to spend the realized savings for the Guam Memorial Hospital and other health-related matters, as I am reading from the public law itself. At no time did you note here that the money was not there because it was being used for the tax refunds. And so I just, first of all, want to reiterate that these are not bills that I had just introduced. You know what I was trying to do? Was really trying to, after we realized that the savings for the refinancing was not going to be realized for 2016 as we were informed, what I was trying to do was actually grab whatever I could of what was available, of cash that was available for DOE and UOG, in light of the fact that they were millions of dollars in the hole. And yet, you know, I do get, first of all, I do get my earful at home from UOG, and then I do get visits, and I do get visits from vendors and phone calls. And these are service providers for our public school system. So I just wanted to go on the record about that. This is not about just trying to, you know, grab and just trying to pump up. And in fact, you know, GCC had informed me this morning that they have not received $6 million of their 2015 2015 budget. So, Madam Speaker, as I speak about this, I'm just putting that out there, that these two bills, as I had cited Public Law 3360 as a funding source, then I just want to ask both of you, then at what point, how can we then help these two institutions who are actually hurting, and given the fact that they have not received their cash allotments for fiscal year 2015, and given their pressing needs?
Thank you, Senator. I'm sure the Vice Speaker would join as well. You know, we recognize your efforts, and there certainly is, and I'm sure the good President knows, there was an MOU that was entered into to ensure that the balance of funds due to the University of Guam at the end of the fiscal year would continue into the new fiscal year, and as cash becomes available, they would continue, and that would not be a forgotten obligation to the University of Guam. We meet with the fiscal team sometimes twice a week, and these matters did come up, and we did give due consideration that these bills were introduced. We also work with Department of Education on a daily basis, and now that we are in the fiscal year, as a matter of fact, another bill that you're entertaining on the floor that we are very much appreciative of, the refinancing of the schools, the leaseback schools, will provide some added relief to the TEFF. Senators, we need to sit with you, and the fiscal policy team wants to actually, we have to come up with a solution in the shortfalls on the TEFF. We admit that we have submitted budgets reflective of the TEFF that was relatively generous, obviously, now that we see we had the revaluation, we had a lot of optimism, and it's just not panning out. And so the Director of Department of Education has come down here consistently and made that known to the body. He's made it known to us. We get the phone calls too. And so what we see, Madam Senator, is Senator Underwood, is that we can work through even the calls for the appropriations that you've made in your bill to continue to do cash releases as it becomes available to those amounts and in excess with regard to the outstanding that's due. In fact, like I said, we've even done it under Memorandum of Understanding. And so we will continue, and we believe that that amount of money should be able to be released even to University of Guam for their needs of the air conditioning system under that MOU. So we just knew that there's a lot of pressures to pay tax refunds. It's in the paper every day. We have senators that have been champions of it here on the floor. And so when we saw that there were no bills to appropriate the resources to the hospital, we moved forward and we moved on to the second priority that we know that the community is clamoring for, that senators have declared to us to do, and so that's what we did. But we certainly will work, Senator, to ensure that the intent of your bills as introduced could be realized through cash management and the outstanding that's due to the education institutions.
So, in other words, there would be a funding source for the two bills.
Well, what we're trying to say is, the problem the quagmire that we're here that we face right now is because we stepped to that priority and paid the tax refunds, there is no funding source. So like we said to Senator Uggan, we don't want to create a deficit. We don't want a deficit spend. What I'm trying to say is we can work with your committee to realize the intent of your bills moving forward, to transfer those monies as part of our normal transfers under allotment, so that the identified need for what you had introduced the bills for could be realized. Now, if there is additional revenues as we continue to track with the budget, and that looks like a viable opportunity to shore up the TEFF and to also provide additional revenues to the University of Guam, then that would be a great opportunity, and it wouldn't render the bills as not going to their intended purpose, but it needs to be funded. And what we're saying, Senator, is in its current situation, as it's identified that funding source, there is no funding source. So we could still realize the intent, as Senator Uggan is willing to do, to probably authorize, if that's what the budget chair would allow or the body would allow to pass, but then it would be subject to a revisit of the budget so that we don't deficit spend.
You're welcome. Mr. Vice Speaker?
Just from that last comment, I just wanted clear that these 8 bills would not have been released from my committee had the source been the 2016 budget. These bills had its public hearing, and at the public hearing on the 19th of September, the letters dated the 16th from Mr. Bloss, at no point at the time of the public hearing did Mr. Bloss notify us that there was no savings. So if you look at the committee report, it's very clear that as of the date of the hearing, as of the date that the committee report was released, and until you issued your letter on Monday, we were informed that there was some savings. I, as credulous as I was about 3360, I didn't believe that there were savings, but I never got any word. The word from you guys was that there were some savings. How much it was, I wouldn't put my name on it, but you were not denying that there was some amount of money. Because all the letters that I got from BBMR and from DOA said, yes, there were savings. We would much rather it go to GMH and health-related activities. If you had said there were no savings, these bills would never have come out of my committee. So when did we know that or when was it that we did not have any money?
To be clear, Vice Speaker, we're talking about the bills call for the savings realized in 2015. This was the original refinancing, and so the reason why we're kind of floating between 2015 and 2016 here is because fiscal year, is that fiscal year 16 does not have any savings. So when we saw in
3360.
Yes, in 3360, 16 doesn't, but 15 does. And if these bills clearly state from the original savings realized from the refinancing. Now, Mr. Vice Speaker, the document, it's escaping me right now in terms of the document from BBMR, which states the funding availability, actually even states that there's an over-appropriation. But then we realized, we clarified to the body, to you, Mr. Vice Speaker, that the money was there, but that there was an over-appropriation. Then we realized, like the good Senator Frank Huggins said, he withdrew 2 of those bills and folded them into the fiscal year 16 budget, which now brought it down to below the 1.5. But, Mr. Vice Speaker, we have always declared that there has been, in fact, in all the press releases that we put out when we completed the signing off on all of the bonds and the refinancing, that we realized the savings for fiscal year 2015, and that and originally, we had known that there was some appropriations in the hopper, but given the fact that tax refunds are the priority before these bills hit the floor and passed and were signed, we paid tax refunds.
And in 3360, unlike the general fund, we made it very clear in 3360 that any and all savings, 15 or 16 or later, would and did require an appropriation from the legislature.
That's correct. We agree with you on that, Vice Speaker. What we don't see is any specific prohibition not to use it for tax refunds. And we understand that the governor has the authority under his organic
It wasn't so much
authority.
it was tax refunds.
Yes.
I'm just saying, in 3360, we made it very clear, if there was any savings at all, this was not savings that was going to be dumped into the general fund or was going to be used elsewhere. It was very clear in 3360 that any and all savings were going to be used for certain things appropriated by 3360 or in subsequent appropriation bills. We left in 3360 the GMH ones because the health chair insisted that it stay. Senator Uggan withdrew his set of appropriation request and said he was going to introduce separate legislation at a later date. So it was clear that we intended that whatever little cash was going to be realized was to be used for the and would be appropriated at a later date. In fact, the governor's transmittal letter of the special session bill at the top of page 2, I thought made that clear, where he says, an authorization requires a public hearing to be held to approve their appropriation. In fact, ensures the community gets the opportunity to say whether they agree with the priorities listed in the authorized spending.
Yeah.
And in the bill that was sent down for the special session, it had all of these projects.
And
so
yeah.
I didn't expect that it was going to be utilized elsewhere. And if it has been, is it my understanding that you're saying that in recognition of the fact that that money had not been specifically appropriated for tax refund, that you would be backfilling that amount so that we could cover the cost of these 8 appropriation bills?
Actually, Vice Speaker, no, I wouldn't consider it a backfilling, because it has to be a specific appropriation within the fiscal year so that we don't deficit spend. And so that would have to be a recognition that a funding source has been realized in addition to the fiscal year 16 budget in order to provide for the funding of those bills. But, we also read here, Mr. Vice Speaker, and you're correct, in terms of the intent of 3360, and it does say the general fund, Mr. Vice Speaker. It says from the refunding, this is section 1 of the 2007 bonds and the 2009 bonds be appropriated from the general fund. And so it says applied towards capital improvements relating to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority and other health-related issues. Now, this clearly states to us, we believed, that the monies would be deposited, just like all others, into the general fund to be appropriated. Now, once again, we understand the very important nature of all the measures that were introduced, and we knew that appropriations would be forthcoming. We just knew also that those bills were introduced prior to the budget being passed. And so the governor was very, he thought that the budget would pass relatively close to what he had submitted, but it didn't. It passed significantly below that, $37 million below that. So that recognition, while it was a fiscal conservative budget, was, okay, we better start doing something with cash, because even though there's bills that are coming out that are going to appropriate money, we don't know what kind of cash flow we're going to have to be able to do our top obligations, which is recognized by this body and us. So we said, you know, these are great bills. We want to fund them, but right now we have to pay tax refunds. So we took that money from the general fund. We put it into, I believe, early last week or the week earlier, we put it into the tax refund trust account, and then after that, we distributed it for tax refunds.
Is there going to be any effort to try to reimburse that savings?
You know, Vice Speaker, we look forward to working with the body, like I said earlier, to address issues with regard to the TAF, with regard to potential shortfalls in public safety and other areas, public works, that we've identified. And we would love to work with you that if we come up with some sort of comprehensive additional revenues to be appropriated on top of the revenues as passed in the 2016 budget, we're definitely on board to fund these projects.
Well, yesterday I announced my oversight with BBMR for next Tuesday, so we'll talk about revenue, that $37 million shortfall.
Okay.
But I'm still trying to get to what was supposed to have been a $1.5 million savings in this refund. And that cash specifically, I thought everybody was on board, and I thought the governor was on board when he transmitted the special session bill, including it, that he was on board to seeing that those things would be funded and would be protected. And though it didn't go through in 3360, and now that they have their own separate little bills pursuant to our standing rules, I understand now that you're saying there is no money to be able to do that, so we're not going to be able to sign it, or we're not going to be able to fund it immediately. Which one is it?
We couldn't sign it, Vice Speaker, because the fact of the matter is that would put us in a situation of deficit spending. The money has been put into the trust fund account and has been distributed to the taxpayers. So we would need an appropriation in excess of the fiscal year 16 budget in order to be able to sign these bills. And so if you pass them, I think Senator Uggin's going down the road of maybe passing them as an authorization and to be coming back for funding on them. I mean, in that case, then we could work together. But I know that we will be held accountable, I'm sure, by yourself and other members of this body if we attempt to spend or to fund these bills or sign them into law, and that would mean we would have to spend money in excess of what the appropriations were for fiscal year 16. And we just can't do that. We've had to work through, we've tried to explain that that's how it happened in 13. In 2013, we came to this body, we introduced bills, the body rose and said, no, you don't need authority to pay tax refunds. We paid it with cash, and now we're showing a deficit, but it's not a cash deficit because we paid tax refunds, but we have a deficit. That might happen here. If we sign these bills into law, we fund them, and then we close the books on 2016, and what happens? We spent $1.8 million more than what we put in. Even if we have the cash, it will still show a deficit.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to use this forum to discuss how the administration is currently handling the tax refund trust fund, or what happened with TEFF.
Okay.
I'm just trying to address specifically in 3360 the $1.5 million that we thought was there, and that's where these two individuals made their appropriation.
That's correct.
And because it was clear in their bill that it was coming from that was the only reason why it was released from the committee. Had they said from 2016, it would have never had a public hearing, much less be released. But we were under the understanding, and a series of letters from DOA director and BBMR director both saying the savings would be better used for GMH. In none of the communications as late as September 30th.
Right.
Even in BBMR's letter, it's on September 30th to Senator Nerissa Underwood's two bills.
That's correct.
In neither DOA on the 16th nor BBMR on the 17th said,
Right.
don't release any of these bills because that money's gone. But by the 30th, if memory serves me right, you had already made the payments.
No, we made the payments out of the trust account on 10/9, 10/12, and 10/15. So, Mr. Vice Speaker, I did the best that I could. It was a courtesy. I penned that letter as quick as I knew the Rules Committee. In fact, I sent a text to the Rules Chair on Friday before the Rules meeting that I would be sending a letter identifying that there is no resources to support these potential bills. I wanted to be as courteous as I could. Once again, the governor, on the implementation of the fiscal year, we had a cabinet meeting, and he instructed every single director to do whatever they can do right now to save on energy, to do what they can managing their personnel, managing their operations, to live within the budget as passed. When we reviewed and we went over everything that was available, the governor said, you know what, I like those bills, and I know that I committed to them when I sent down, and I know that Senator Underwood introduced some bills, but the fact of the matter is I don't know what this fiscal year is going to look like. So he said, pay tax refunds. And so we did. What cash do you have on hand, guys? We said, well, we have this amongst others. Actually, it's in excess. I believe we're a total of almost $4 million for this fiscal year going forward. So he said to us, where's the cash? What cash do you have? And we said, well, we have this as part of other cash available. And he just said, pay tax refunds. And so, that's what we did. And then once I knew that, because this is all well within the 10/20 public hearing or rules meeting, I texted the good rules chair last Friday. That would have been the 15th or 16th, something like that. And then what I did was I penned the letter prior to the rules meeting to be as courteous as we could. That was the marching order. Pay tax refunds.
Okay, I just wanted to make it clear that the information that we had and that is contained in the committee reports show that there was money. The BBMR and DOA would much rather that it go someplace else, but they weren't saying that there was no money there.
That's correct, Mr. Vice Speaker. We don't dispute that. That's correct. Until the letter arrived and until I did a courtesy notification, you are correct. There was an anticipation that the revenue would be there, other than the governor saying pay tax refunds.
The floor is now open to anyone else. Senator Underwood, are you done? Or?
I just have a follow-up. I'm
Okay.
sorry. We received the September 2015 report on the bank ending balance as of September 30 was yesterday, and we see a reserve for contingencies here, a balance of $11.4 million.
That's you, bro.
For what? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
11 million for the balances. Oh, I don't have. Everybody. That.
Yes.
Yeah. Those
So
are balances at the
we
time.
received this. I think we received this in a regular basis, and we received
Yeah.
it yesterday. And basically, what it states here is that you have a reserve for contingencies, 11.4 million, that was reported as of the ending of September 2015. I can
Yeah, there's
provide you a
yeah.
copy of, and so my question is, was this also part of that cash refunds that were used over the, over the past few days?
I believe the reserve is as per the Budget Act and the constraints that we put on ourselves. So that we wouldn't spend in excess of the reserve. We would hold that for any potentiality of how we got to manage cash. So I believe that would be as per the Budget Act. That wouldn't be available for disbursement unless the fiscal office said good to go. We're tracking otherwise, and we are in excess of our reserve. I think it's 5%, and go ahead and spend whatever additional revenues are there. But I believe that's there because it has to be there by law.
Wait, so I think maybe she's saying that the statement as of September the 30th, 2015, that there is $11.5 million cash, like in the bank.
Today is the 19th.
You're right. Well, I understand. So, but the question is that was that any of that money used as part of, in addition to the $1.4 million that was used for tax income returns?
Because of what you had noted was the need.
Yeah, we would have to go back and see exactly how. That's a couple weeks premature before this. So there may have been additional expenditures, but that may be the reserve as well. And this $4 million may be what was in above reserves, and that's what you're allowed to spend, but you couldn't spend that. I mean, we're glad that the account balances are showing that the reserve are there in cash, but we won't spend it if it's locked down as per the Budget Act as a reserve. So we would only spend in above what we have to hold. But we could get you that detail in terms of how the accounting tracked.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Senator Morrison? Please just raise your hand and I'll take a note of who would like to speak. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Senator and Vice Speaker, for your time. I want to thank the Governor for speaking to the Mayor's Council and endorsing the intent of these measures, these bills. And I also want to thank Senator Ogden for inviting me to co-sponsor one of his bills, Bill 156. I'm just going to direct this to you, Senator, because you participated in a site visit down to the Umatic Bridge, and absent 156, I want to assure the people in the South that with our site visit, we all are very aware of the situation there, losing sense of safety and seeing the width narrow, the bridge being impacted. Although the director of DPW stated in the public hearing the integrity of the bridge is sound, I'm still kind of concerned about that. I'd like to see a full-scale engineering report on that. That was just a statement on the public hearing. That bridge was built in the 80s, and it's had its share of impact from earthquakes to flooding, and what we're seeing right now with its narrowing of the width of the river. So my question would be that it was my hope coming out of that meeting that there will be some expedited efforts with the engineers and through DPW, the administration, seeing what type of resources we can put into mitigating some of the issues or damages there. 156, working Senator Ogden, was an attempt, because hearing the structural integrity is sound according to the director, that we can proceed with other additional fixes to the bridge. So I wanted to get an update. It's been close to a year now, I believe, since we visited there. Some of my other colleagues were there. The mayor was there. There were some engineers there. So I really would like to know where we're at today. We want to ensure the people there that there is efforts being made to address that situation.
Thank you, Senator, and I certainly did enjoy the visit, and I know the commitments were and have been made. I believe that visit was sometimes late January, early February of this year. The governor today addressed specifically the mayor of, actually every mayor that had questions, specifically the mayor of Yamatic on that issue. On hand were several cabinet members to include Glenn Leon Guerrero from the Department of Public Works. His update was he's going out to procurement on the $250,000 for the study of the cemetery to get the design work done and everything in the study to shore up the shoreline for the cemetery. Now, in the interim, we are awaiting a visit in 2 weeks from Army Corps, and they have put the bridge as well as other capital improvement projects in the south on their radar. The governor is going to tour personally with Army Corps to work on that. But in the meantime, Senator, the Department of Public Works Director has once again reiterated to the mayors that he is stationing all of the heavy equipment that recently came in, to include dump trucks, backhoes, and a mini excavator throughout the villages in order to do all of their rehabilitation of their ponding basins. But we will work within this week and early next week to work specifically with the Yamatic mayor on a commitment that we made to dredge as much as possible the current situation with the bridge down in Yamatic to try to relieve some of that flooding that is providing for, I believe, the water is almost going up and over the bridge. So you'll see that in a matter of weeks in terms of working with the mayor. We've done a number of different projects down there. We've done road improvements and the like. I know you drive down there every day, but the thing is that, but this is what is in the immediate future. And we really kind of don't want to move, other than the bricks falling and the other engineering to the facade or the upper portion of that bridge. We don't want to move on any of the other capital hardening of the bottom until we get Army Corps on board. We might even be able to get some federal funds for that. But we were not going to just leave it. We will go forward and ensure that we do the dredging so we can minimize the overflow of the water. And you should see that in a couple of weeks, Senator. But I want to be clear also, Senator, we're committed to this bill. We just have to find the funding source, and we have to ensure we don't deficit spend. But we're still on board, and we told the mayor that today.
Is there anybody else who would like to? Senator Espo-Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Gentlemen, welcome. Welcome back.
Thanks, Senator.
Actually, quick question. This last budget cycle, and when we were preparing the budget and we passed the budget for this fiscal year, for 2016, of course we passed it about $37 million below what the request from ADLOOP was. And again, that was more to be on the conservative side and whatnot. During that session, when we were discussing the budget, and the chairman of the committee said that if, let me backtrack just a step. I believe representatives or somebody represented that we are going to be tracking more in fiscal year 2016. And in spite of it, we still went down and got conservative and passed a budget that was about $37 million below what was requested. The question really is, since you were all involved at that level in terms of trying to track it, when can we anticipate where we might start tracking over and above what this legislature has passed?
So when we provided an opportunity for a possible amendment, what we had looked at was the culmination of the first 2 quarters. So we think that we could get a good gauge. We think we could probably get a good gauge just shortly after the first quarter, but maybe that trend won't be enough. So we conservatively, I think, we could continue to spend we're going to continue to spend at our appropriation levels, but we think we'd have a solid number on how we're tracking shortly after the second quarter end.
Okay, so about 6 months down the line.
Sure.
Around March.
That's
probably.
correct. That's correct.
Okay, and then that would probably be around the time when, if it does start showing the positive tracking that was anticipated by the administration, like the chairman said, then we would probably be able to go into looking at a supplemental budget if we are tracking above what we had passed.
You know, I kind of want to be clear. It really wasn't designed to be, and I hope it didn't come out that way, but it wasn't designed to necessarily be a battle. It was designed to show what we saw from our perspective when the supplemental budget came out. But make no mistake about it, we're excited about being conservative. We really want to make sure we share your sentiments in terms of making sure that we don't overspend, and we share the sentiments of deficit reduction. And it really is helping us kind of to have our directors hold the line and make sure that, you better have a darn good reason for spending money if you want to spend money. So, but yeah, I mean, we look forward to that. We look forward to that opportunity, and we think that we could come to some really good terms sometime, like you said, around March, April, to say, hey, here we are, guys, and we were thinking that we're still going that direction. So we'd appreciate what your view is with the appropriation authority, and hopefully we can concur. Maybe it won't be perfect again. Maybe it will be 25 instead of 37, or
Right.
maybe 30. But
at that time, I guess
that would be the time frame.
Yeah,
Senator.
I guess that would be the time that we would be able to look at the projects that are listed in these 9 bills before us to safely say, yes, there is funding for these kind of projects.
I think so, and I think,
appropriate.
I think so, and I think that some of them, particularly maybe the sports related, I don't know how the limited gaming fund is tracking. I know it's continued to generate some momentum. I know that there's a discussion that we need your help. We need to get some commissioners on board for the cockfighting licensing, because we believe there's some escape revenues there. They're not contributing right now to the overall limited gaming fund, and we anticipated that would generate some reasonable revenue. So we've got a lot of things to do. Maybe in anticipation of that, Senator Uggan, on the fields and stuff. Maybe we can see how the limited gaming fund is tracking and do some releases to the to the mayors under that funding source. But yeah, I would say specifically in terms of the timeline.
If I may, Senator,
Sure.
just a point of information. I know, Senator Espanon, you have the floor. But as it applies to that, the mayor of Sinajana already is committing his allocation for the last 2 fiscal years of the limited gaming fund, plus
Right.
the upcoming fiscal year to match the 150 that is being requested. Also,
Okay.
the mayor of Talafofo already is committing $14,000 of his committed limited gaming fund to augment the allocation that would otherwise be given to Talafofo for the repair of the field. So you're absolutely right. The mayors are doing their part,
Right.
and they're saying we'll put in our share so that we can get these facilities up. Point of information. Thank you.
I
Madam
got you. So yeah, but straight up, I think that'll be the timing to come back and fund these projects along with other critical funding for
I appreciate
some
that.
safety and Department of Public Works projects for roads.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator McCready?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for coming, you two former colleagues. I'm going to take I'm not saying anyone didn't, but I'm just going to take the common sense approach because that's basically all I know how to do. And what I have gathered here today, Chris and Mr. Blas, is you guys are willing to work together with us. You didn't come in here and try and shoot their bills down and say, we're not going to do it. The governor's not going to veto the bill, and there's no money to pay it. What you guys did is you came in here with just the opposite solution, was to work together, and we don't see that much, But when we do see it, I see a solution now at the end. I thought this committee of a whole could have been over as soon as you said we'll do whatever we can to make sure that we make these bills work, because they're important pieces of legislation that should be implemented and should be mandated, and it's something we do need. So I commend both authors for coming up with this bill. Obviously, your marching orders were the same marching orders that we asked for, paying tax refunds, And at the end of the day, we're not going to sit here and then blame you guys for deficit spending, which is what you are talking about. You'll work with us, but don't put the blame on you guys when you fund the bills, and then you guys get accused of deficit spending. We both have to carry that water bag. I think it's very important to know, the public listening. Politics is one thing, fine, but finding solutions through those politics is just common sense. Work together. come up with a solution. There's a lot of smart people in here. There's a lot of smart people in Adelu. And the governor makes sense. He's paying the tax refunds with all the money he has, whether it's surplus or whether it's budgeted. And so I think that's a very important point to make. Well, I support the bill. You cannot not support the bill. It's a tough 2 or 4 or 6 tough bills not to support. We're going to have to support it. Although these bills were in another piece of legislation that were taken out that probably would have alleviated these problems, that we wouldn't have to be here today, it's still something that I think we should pass. And so I just want to say and go on the record, the governor sending you down here to open your arms up and say we will work with you to implement this, whether he lapses it into law or signs it, is a good sign. And it's a sign that, and I was telling the author, Senator Ogden, that his bill has life, not dead. And so we were called into this committee of the whole because there were two opinions, one from BBMR's $11.5 million cash, and one from your letter that's saying we didn't have the money to pay this. At least now we have a clear, educated version of how to move forward with this, and we move forward together. And so I want to thank you guys, and that's what I take from it. And so hopefully at the end of all of this, we can rise up and have bills that we need to implement, pass them, and the governor and this body can work together and get that money to the people who need it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator. And that's along the lines of what Senator Espaldon, I believe that's where he was going. And that I communicated that to Senator Uggan. You know, it's not that we don't want to do this, it's that we have to revisit it in the frame that it would be an appropriation other than the funding source that's no longer there. So we anticipated that that would be covered during a time at which we revisited some additional revenues for the fiscal year 16 budget. So your observation is correct.
Anyone else? Members? Follow up, Senator Morrison?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to follow up on Senator Ogden's statements on the limited gaming fund. We all know Public Law 33-62 authorized continuous appropriations. Have all LGF been released up starting with FY 2015 to the mayors, DPR and DOE?
Senator, can we send you an email with regard to that? We don't have that number in front of us, but we certainly will follow up.
Okay, because I know you're before the governor was before the mayors, and actually that's what the main topic they've been asking is when are those things going to be released. So you can send an email to the speaker, to myself. We could find out exactly that funding source so we could answer these mayors.
We will send that information to the speaker, and she said that she'll disseminate it to all senators, but we will provide that information,
Okay.
Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
You're welcome.
Senator Blas, and then Senators Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Gentlemen, Vice Speaker, Senator, thank you very much for being here. I guess, just clarity for me, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to revisit this should, I guess the revenues be a little bit better than what has been now agreed upon, okay? That said, though, is recognizing that the governor initially sent a budget request that was basically $30-some-odd million more than what was passed. Is then it can it be safely assumed that the opportunity to be able to visit these projects occur, or let's assume that the revenues do project a much higher, and tracked more towards what the governor had anticipated. Obviously, there was a reason why he had submitted that budget request at that amount. Is there going to be that opportunity, or is there going to be need to be able to take care of those items that were basically, for lack of a better term, taken out of the budget for this more conservative budget? Take care of those items first before these can be addressed, or how is this going? How do you anticipate this to work?
That's why I was kind of cautious to basically say that, you know, these items are at the front of the bus. I think what's important is that the body as a whole come together, and we provide you the numbers, and we say, here's where we are. As I had the dialogue with Senator Espaldon, we closed out the second quarter, we're a couple of weeks into the third, and this is what we're showing. You know, we're going to have to defer to you. You're the appropriating authority. Come back and say, okay, you're tracking correct. We'll identify the priorities you identified in the original submittal, or maybe it's less for so-and-so and more for so-and-so. If it's a supplemental, it'll be all-inclusive as we see it generating from this body. A supplemental that would, I'm sure Senator Uggan and Senator Underwood will pray upon the committee to include those as part of the supplemental appropriation. So we just see we're going to have to defer to how you end up, you know, appropriating those revenues in excess. But, you know, obviously we're not, I'm sure that GPD will come to you and say,
sure,
Senator Frank, you know, I really want that $2 million back for overtime, or I really want X back or Y back. And I'm sure it will happen, you know, DPW will say, can I have that $2 million back for, you know, secondary roads? And so I'm sure that will happen, but I'm sure somewhere in there, these other measures would be a priority of this body. I mean, you're deliberating now because I think you really want to pass them, but it's just that there's no funding.
Okay, yeah.
But you're right. We would just take it in the aggregate of how you entertain what we give to you. If we, you know, BBMR will come forward, fiscal team will come forward and say, here's what we got, guys. We're tracking what we said. Do you think it's still capable? And then we'll defer, but we will definitely reiterate those things we identified in the budget, and then we'll work with you.
Yeah, and I just don't want us to lose sight of the fact that there are those items that were taken out, and this is going to, you know, we're going to have to address those as well.
We'll stick with those priorities that were identified by the agencies. We thought that they were on track. You know, we thought that they were identifying not in excess or not something that was a budget that was a dream budget. We thought that they were giving what they thought they would need or they thought would be ideal. So you're right. I mean, we would want those priorities, but you know, we'll have to defer to working with you and seeing what it is at the time.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks,
thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator San Nicolas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good afternoon, Senators. So just to be clear, because I heard it a little bit, but I just want to make sure it's crystal clear, there is no funding for these bills based on the funding source identified in the bills.
That's correct, Senator.
Okay, so now that's clear. We kind of know what we probably have to do with these bills going forward. I do want to have a conversation based on some of the stuff that was talked about earlier, particularly with respect to seeing how the tracking is going to go towards the second quarter and probably appropriating from there. You know, if we commit to stuffing the system with as much cash as possible, particularly during that period, we will be able to pay out tax refunds much faster. We'll also be able to start getting on a track to pay out our vendors much faster. I remember, Mr. Blas, it was February, March, April. We were already getting tax returns in for refunds, you know, and then everything kind of stalled out this year around February on the filings. So already during the second quarter of the fiscal year, we know that there's going to be a high demand for people to get their tax refunds paid out. And if we're tracking way above what we originally budgeted for, that means that the cash will be available immediately to pay those obligations out. I would much rather prefer that we do that, we pay those refunds as quickly as possible, and then continue on throughout the remainder of the fiscal year until more towards the latter half, where we can say, hey, you know what, tax refunds are already paid out, we're practically done here, and it's July. You know, that'll be wonderful. That'll be a wonderful achievement for the government, for the administration, for the legislature. And then in July, we can say, hey, you know what, July, August, September, yeah, you know, we're going to continue to track higher, and from there, we can probably come back and get the appropriations for these other projects. So, you know, I would like to just state that for the record that at least this senator, you know, that's something that I would like for us to work towards as an ideal. You know, getting more cash stuffed into the systems that we can pay out our obligations faster, the tax refunds and the vendor payments. These appropriations, you know, for these kind of things, and this is just a small handful of so many things, and you both know this. You know, we have so many flooding issues that need to be addressed throughout the island. We have so much roads that need to get fixed. There's so many priorities. This is just a small handful of them. And, you know, as those priorities become more pronounced through wear and tear and everything else, you know, we're going to have to tackle them as they come along. But I think we all share the governor's sentiments when he spoke to the mayors today that these are all things that everybody can all agree are good things to do. The question becomes, of course, is the money there? And the answer is no, not right now. And then going forward, if the money does become available, the question becomes, are we really going to spend it on these things, or are we going to actually start paying out refunds faster? Those are things that we're going to have to all wrestle with as leaders of limited resources. I did want to ask, though, when the governor spoke to the mayors, did he tell them that there was no funding for these things as drafted? Because, it's one thing for him to say he supports it. It's another thing for him to be very honest with them also and say, I support it, but the money just isn't there right now. Did he make that clear, or are they expecting us to appropriate something that really is not available?
No, as a matter of fact, I think if you will find that if there's news coverage, and I'm parroting what the governor said. He was frank with them that there was no funding, and for the very reasons that I discussed, that the tax refunds were paid, but he remained committed to the process. In fact, everything that I've said to you today in terms of your ability to revisit the budget, and I understand, I'm sure you're going to be, the champion for what happens to those resources going forward, how they get allocated. The whole body will deliberate that. But the fact of the matter is, in fact, word for word, what I've said to you today is what the governor said to the mayors. We will work with the legislature. We want to work with the legislature upon positive tracking of the numbers to revisit the budget, to provide the opportunities to fund these bills. So there was we didn't tag you, Senator. It wasn't, okay, now it's your turn, or here's your potato. It was, we're going to work with you, and we're going to try to, get this done together.
That's really good. One of the things too, if you can help me follow up on it, I just sent a letter to the governor with this whole thing up at Rev and Tax, them wanting to bring in third-party eyes to begin looking at things. I sent him a letter just earlier this morning, encouraging him to also do that also with respect to our collections up there at the department. I know in the last couple of years I had some hearings, and there's just a lot of money that's escaping our collections for whatever reason, I'm not sure. But maybe we need to get third-party eyes on that also and figure out, why do we have, $10, $15, $20 million, up to $40 million I've seen in abatements in the collections up at DRT. And if we can tighten that up as well, that's hard cash that's supposed to be coming in. So if I can just ask you to also kind of help that along. I think if we get third-party eyes on our collections process up there, the similar way that we're having GPD looking at the driver's license division, and then we had some third-party people looking over at the ABC board. I think that sometimes we get we can feel bothered by that, but I think the governor's approach has been very good. Let's look at it and let's try and see if we can actually fix it. I'm right there with that. I hope that we can get third-party eyes on the collections as well. But I do thank you guys for coming down here and sharing your perspectives. My last thing I kind of just like to leave everybody with. Madam Speaker, is if we were notified way in advance of these bills being introduced that the funding was already going to be used for the refunds, the bills probably wouldn't have been introduced, and they definitely would not have been reported out by the committee chair if he knew that the money was already expended. And so to kind of get the letter just before the rules meeting just the other day, when we were already, well into the process, and we even at the hearings on the bills, it kind of just, it puts the senators into a tough spot, because they carried it this far, only to have to stop all of a sudden and be told that the money's not there. So if we can just get more accurate, timely information prior to taking things all the way to this point, I think it'll be better for everybody at the policy level, because we really rely on the information in order to decide what kind of action to take.
Yeah, that point well taken, Senator. And like I said, just to reiterate, I know I'll be redundant in terms of my statement, but following the process, the bills were introduced prior to the budget, with the exception of the two bills from Senator Underwood, and then post the budget, there were a series of meetings, several days afterwards, whereby the governor put down his directives. And it really was within that. If I had a bigger lead time, you have my commitment, and I'll do due diligence to do the best I can in terms of lead time with regard to information. You have my commitment there, Senator.
Thanks, Chris. One more thing I just remembered. The allotments to DOE, are they current, or I mean, because I remember we had a round table, and it was one of those round tables where I kind of was really pushing for, hey, what's the status on that? And then to the point where the chair of education himself said, Senator, let me work with DOA, and I said, okay, fine, it's your call.
It did.
So did they get all their allotment, or?
They did, but the TFF is deficient anyway, to the tune of about $4 million. And so, and the balance, I'm working with Talinga Taitano and the superintendent, John Fernandez. In fact, we're working on helping them out on their some other issues that they've been asking of us. So we're on top of that, without a doubt. In fact, I spoke to Taling, the controller, I guess the superintendent, one of the associate superintendents over there.
So the T.
And as to UOG, as Senator Chris Joanna made earlier, with Congressman Robert Underwood, we have an MOU, and we're on top of that. I spoke to one of the financial managers of their UOG, so we're working with them to assist them on the accreditation issues. We're on the same page, and we want to help them out.
So if the budget was balanced when we passed it last year, and TEFF came in $4 million short, then we can already presume that we have a $4 million deficit with respect, at least, to the TEFF.
Well, I guess the amounts there is about, I think, almost about $4 million. I'm not the details.
And so, and when we passed the current FY 2016 budget, is that factoring in the TEF that we now know was short, or is that assuming that the TEF at the time when we crafted the budget was going to be an accurate figure? Are we going to track to potentially be short in TEF again this year? It's like a chronic problem that DOE is constantly having to compoundedly deal with.
Yeah.
Senator, I would say that it's fair to say that we more than likely will be below, but we're not going to be where we were chronically 5 years ago. If you look at, and I was just talking to the speaker, if you look at the revaluation, it's been getting closer and closer and closer. I think audited numbers may show within 2 million or so on this year. It started out at 5.8 or 6, and then it was 4, and whatever added up to that 13 for the last 3. But it's getting closer now that the revaluation has gone through that. And you're right, with Rev and Tax dropping the hammer a little bit more, it might get even a little bit closer, more collections. And so, but aside from that, it's inching closer, but it's something that we're going to have to work with you coming down. And, I've talked to John offline. He said, it has to be a dual branch solution. We have to admit at one point that we're going to have to reduce that TEFF and probably correspondingly increase the general fund.
Right.
I know that there was a slight increase this year in general fund. Not that should make up, because if they've got the authority under TEFF, if they've got the authority under general, then that should be their cumulative total budget. But at some point, we are going to have to probably admit, both of us, from the administration level and down here, saying that number is not working anymore, and we're going to have to make a corresponding change.
So this $4 million shortfall in the TEFF for DOE, how are we? No, it's tracking closer, right, Senator? I think it's somewhere around 1.8 or 2.
I want to provide a point of information here. I just received a letter from DOE a few minutes ago, and they delineated what has not been released to them. It's not just from TEFF that they are accounting for the $5,864,209 that has not been released to them. It includes not only TEFF, but it includes the GDOE operation funds, the Chamorro Studies, Salapi Principat, Textbook Fund, TEFF Operations Fund, TEFF Early Childhood Program, Interscholastic Sports Fund, and the busing services, the health and physical activities. They had delineated it here in this letter, and they also had noted that $1,242,205 in reimbursements for the following, which is the typhoon-related expenses of $290,000, merit bonus of $233,000, and Government of Guam Competitive Wage Act of $718,000 plus. So that accounts for an additional $1.2 million that they are awaiting for reimbursements. in addition to the $5,864,000. So that's not all TEFF that we're talking about.
I know. The $3 million is that I see before me is 3044, and Tolling knows that. We don't have the money to give you on the TFF. The $1 million on the I think this is Slapi Principal or something. I think one of those projects we paid, or the 900,000. One of them we fronted them already. So that amount is been reduced. I can give you the reconciliation document that we have. I can forward to you, and you can see it there for your review.
The reason why I'm just bringing this up, Madam Speaker, is that the Chair of Education is trying to appropriate new money on top of that money to try and buttress what's not going in. And so if the department is just able to get what they're already supposed to get, perhaps she can belay these requests. And I got to admire her for introducing her bills. I thought it was very bold, given that Senator Uggin's bills were there first, and she kind of just put hers in anyway. But that's kind of where DOE's at. They just need the funds. And if we can just again reiterate it to the administration that I don't spend, okay? So I'm not trying to add anything to the equation here. I'm just also asking that, with the money that we do have, in the interest of meeting the obligations that we've already committed to, and even before we take on new things that we all agree are important, we do need to get the money into the hands of the people that need to make the payments.
Senator, that's why I had that dialogue with the senator, and we'll give you the reconciliation. We'll add that to what we're going to provide. With regard to the limited gaming fund, so we'll coordinate that, whether those numbers are 100% accurate. So we'll give you the reconciliation. But you're right, Senator. That was the point that I was making. We just started the fiscal year. Right. I'm sure we've always worked together. That's why we have an MOU with UOG. This is not just hanging out there. These things were negotiated. We had discussions with.
No, this is DOE though, right?
No, I understand.
Okay.
But I'm just trying to say that these are the discussions that we've had with their fiscal people. That this is not, yes, there are the carryovers, and we've got to make good on that. But we agreed to it. We throughout October. We know you got the visitation coming. We will release as cash comes in, and we will make good, and we'll keep going forward. And that's why I'm saying in the beginning of the fiscal year now, if it comes down to what the amount is recognized in the $500,000, we can do that through working our cash management.
But this also goes back to BBMR though, and again the subject of why they came in during the public hearings and testified the way they did with respect to these bills. They should have come in and said TEFF is $4 million short. If they come in and tell us that we're short in other areas of this government, then we can think twice about moving forward expenditures and getting everybody's hopes up, only to have to come back and say, oops, we don't have enough. So if the communications from the agencies, particularly BBMR, can factor in the big picture for us and tell us that yes, maybe they might say that there's funding for this in the savings, but oops, we're $4 million short on this other hole, then we'd be like, well, maybe we shouldn't spend that, we should plug that hole. And that's what you're doing on a cash management basis, and I respect that. But for us on a policy basis, we don't want to be introducing these things and then not having the money for it.
But
I'll just end it there.
Yeah, by the same token, Senator, I think you could say it's fair that BBMR and the fiscal team constantly releases cash, even though the TFF is tracking the way it is. It's the reconciliation, it's the reimbursement.
No, but knowing that the TEF was short.
Right.
They should have come in during the public hearings of these bills and said, as much as we'd appreciate these projects to get funded as you do, TEFF is short $4 million, and we got to figure out where that money's going to come.
That's correct, Senator. However, with these bills specifically, you have a specific funding source, so we had to honor that. It wasn't as though you were looking for the funding from the general fund in particular. You were looking for it from a specific funding source, and so that's got merit. And it had merit all the way up until 10-14.
No, but this specific funding source,
refunds.
The savings from this specific funding source still reverted back to the general fund anyway.
That's correct.
And so those general
Even
fund
as per
obligations
law,
for DOE could have been funded from this specific funding source, but you use it for tax refunds, which is a management decision. But if BBMR came back and said we were short on those ends, we would probably have never even introduced these things on the.
So, Senator, I think maybe the first point of discussion then, before we even, as you talked about tax refunds, maybe the first point of discussion that we go to when we come back in March is, what are we doing about TEFF? What are we doing from your perspective? What are we doing from our perspective?
I very much agree. I have my own personal perspectives on
Are we
this
going to
as well.
not be? Are we not going to be in denial and just say, you know what, we're going to have to put TEFF at 14, and call it good, and then we're going to have to find that money somewhere.
I
If
think
that's
it's a
the
healthy
takeaway,
conversation.
we can agree with you on that.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much, Senator.
Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm also listening very intently to what I believe has been a very productive conversation this afternoon. I want to welcome both of you and offer my support also that the communications certainly between the administration and the legislature have improved. So much so that even before we get a letter, we're getting advised that a letter will be forthcoming. And it's not only in the case where Senator Dueñas pointed out, it's also Senator Blas has done the same and other cabinet officials. But I was just wondering why you wrote the letter to me and not to the appropriations chair. I mean, although the bills were before the Rules Committee, certainly the Committee of Jurisdiction was still the Vice Speaker's committee. But the Speaker and I brought the letter to the Rules meeting. We openly talked about it. Senator Uggan openly recognized it, and it was entered into the record. But at that point, we couldn't just say, okay, the money was spent for tax refunds, let's just not put the bills on the agenda, because there needs to be this kind of solution brainstorming session where we could derive at a solution. And so what I'm hearing is that there are several reasons why the bill is problematic from the governor's perspective, and I recognize the administration being cautious in not wanting to have appropriations exceed the adopted revenue. Then you start deficit spending. And that was the case you tried to argue with respect to what happened in 2013, and you've argued that it's a paper deficit. And at the time I was wondering if maybe a solution could be administrative in nature, where the legislature just goes in and amends that budget act, recognizes that the revenue collections exceeded the revenue collections exceeded the revenue projections, and so in that sense there is no deficit, whether it's paper or otherwise. I made that offer, and certainly that offer wasn't accepted. And I was wondering though if that could have been a solution to wiping out the dark cloud as to whether or not there was a deficit in that fiscal year. But we're past that, right? So now we have 7 bills before us, and I'm hearing several reasons why the bill may go forward or the bill should not go forward. And Senator Chris, you also said that even if the cash were there, the governor would be very cautious about moving forward because it would result in a paper deficit. So at the time the bills were introduced by Senator Uggan and Senator Underwood, they recognized the funding source. So we're not going to dispute that a funding source exists. But the conversation is that the cash which resulted from the initial savings from the FY, realizing FY 2015 pursuant to 3360, the cash is not there because it was used to pay tax refunds. And no one is going to argue that move, because that certainly is a top priority on anybody's list of priorities. I'm just wondering, Madam Speaker and colleagues and senators who are representing the administration now, if it could be something as simple as representing how this bill is being packaged. If we could consider raising the revenue estimate by these amounts, recognizing this is the funding source, and then you do the appropriations from there, and then it still comes down to cash management. I'm not suggesting raising it by $37 million, but in this case, no one is arguing that the money was collected, because the money was collected as a result of these savings that were realized from this bond refunding. I just don't want these bills to stay in committee, or I don't want these bills to pass and they're vetoed or they're lapsed into law, and then there's going to be all this back and forth of, even if we pass an authorization, we would still have to come back, and if the governor acted on the authorization, then it would still be the same situation where it'll be deficit spending, or it'll be spending beyond what the revenue adopted revenue levels are. And so even if it were an authorization bill, we'd still have to come back and provide the appropriation, and when you provide the appropriation, you're going to have to increase the revenue estimate. What I'm offering us today, Madam Speaker, is something that probably will be done 6 months from now, but we don't have to wait 6 months from now. So you still have, you would have 7 measures before you that, and then it would just be a cash issue. And I concede that throughout the last maybe 5 or 6 years, we've been very lucky as a government to get windfalls where we never anticipated. Some way, somehow, manna from heaven and blessings from above. We've managed to, whether they came in the form of bond borrowing or whether they came in the form of reconciled Section 30 monies, or whether no matter how we got those monies, we did receive those monies, and we were able to avail of those resources to pay tax refunds and meet other obligations of the government. So, Madam Speaker, if we can take a moment and think about how we could repackage these bills so that the governor's concern expressed to us by his representative and the director of administration, reiterating those concerns that even if the cash is there, the governor would not be compelled to act on it, because I mean it's a black eye in any administration to want to have to end in a deficit, particularly when those years prior there was no, those fiscal years didn't end in a deficit. And so I know I'm making our appropriations chair very uncomfortable, or maybe because if we recognize that the money was received, right, because there was an initial savings.
That's correct.
So that's revenue, right? Mm-hmm. So why wouldn't that revenue be added to the revenue levels we adopted for FY16 and then appropriate from there? And then everybody can call it a day. When the cash is available, we don't have to wait 6 months. Hopefully we don't have to wait 6 weeks, but through the governor's continued ability to manage the cash that comes in and his ability to be prudent with respect to meeting all these authorizations, you're not going to come back and say, we can't act on this because we don't want a deficit spend.
Yeah. Let me apologize for 2 things first. And I'll be corrected to send any correspondence as such to the appropriations chair in the future, and I apologize for that. The other thing I apologize for is I guess I've been corrected enough, and I might as well put it on the record. There is no such thing as a paper deficit. There's a deficit, okay? So there's a deficit that doesn't require cash, is what we're trying to say. And so what I did with your suggestion, Mr. Majority Leader, was I went to the fiscal team, and I don't think the issue that you brought forward is dead in terms of the fiscal dealing with that maybe in the next budget act a section in there. And the thing is it has to pass the Gatsby accounting adopted. That's why I know Gatsby doesn't say paper deficit, so I'm sorry. But what we were trying to allude to is the fact that there is no cash responsibility of the government. You've got to recognize it on a balance sheet. And so you're right, Senator, and your suggestion was great. It just wasn't ripe for this particular budget cycle, simply because that research is being done. But, to end with your suggestion, I think that's creative. I think as long as it, doesn't put forward that, we would be spending more than what was adopted, and that's the will of the body. And if that's done, I'm sure the governor will be amenable to funding the projects, as long as...
Well, a lot of my suggestions aren't ripe for the moment, but in retrospect, like 6 months, a year down the line, maybe we could have done things differently.
Sure.
So it's an idea that's before its time.
Well, so I've heard that premature representation earlier in a bill that we're really happy about. 175 looks good. Thank you, Senator Tom. The bottom line is that with the will of the body, if you revisit revenues and projections and the like, and
but I know why our Vice Speaker, our Appropriations Chair, is uncomfortable, because we just don't want to open up Pandora's box. So if we have the understanding and focus that the only increase we're going to entertain is specific to the savings realized from Public Law 3360. And so it's, if we can increase it by the savings, who's to say some senator might not say, hey, but I think that because of the record of decision being signed, we might get another 10 million, and then let's appropriate up to 10 million.
That
think
that
we're-
could start the
I'm
process.
asking,
Yeah.
but I'm saying it. I don't think it would start the process because we all want to be fiscally.
Gentleman's agreement.
We want to constrain ourselves from, and then also in the budget process. And the vice speaker was very honorable and to publicly say that he hopes he's wrong. He hopes all of us are wrong when we adopted a more conservative budget that was $37 million less than what the governor
I hope you're
wanted.
wrong, too.
And we also talked about an idea that 6 months from now, or after 2 quarters of actual collection experiences, that the governor take the lead in introducing a bill to the legislature on how those additional revenues should be. Because to be fair, he said that this would happen, and so he identified all the spending priorities in the spending plan up to that amount, and we believe that we should be cautious. And so after the first 2 quarters of collections, if the revenues are there as we hope they would be, then I think the governor should take the lead in identifying what those spending priorities ought to be. And we actually talked about putting an amendment in the Budget Act that would make the governor, if he so desires, to be the one to submit that bill. But certainly the response I got, and I respect, is that the governor has that authority anyway. And any one of us in this body has that authority anyway. But we just don't want it to be, we want it to be disciplined, right, in how we go and continue to recognize those revenues that weren't recognized originally, and that we expend accordingly. But
In fairness, what we wanted was automatic, but of course a blank
well,
check
you know,
wasn't
that
the will
was
of the body.
DOA. That was DOA.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
correct.
Department of Administration.
That's
It's
correct.
another acronym.
But
Well,
you
what
know,
you wanted was
in the
usurp
spirit,
the authority
yeah.
of the legislature. You wanted just some mid-level bureaucrat to say the revenues are projecting upward, so we're going to adjust the revenue estimate.
Good enough, Senator. I
Would you
have to
consider-
defer to the fiscal team on that. I know that we'll certainly send the the tracking, and we'll certainly reflect the optimism if it's there, and then we'll just work from there. We'll work with the budget chair.
But will you consider my proposal? Because in order for this to go forward, 2 things have to happen. The governor, yourselves have to be comfortable, and then also this body has to be comfortable in raising the revenue estimates to this amount, and then appropriating from, then you can say you're really appropriating from FY 2016 and you're not.
On that note, Senator, really, I know that I can't make that decision. I know that Tony can't, but we'll go straight down.
But you're the
if
one
you
who wrote
recess-
you're the one who wrote the letter to me.
Yeah, I
Saying-
wrote the letter recognizing that with all due apologies, the money's not there. But in terms of making the final decision of accepting the raising of the revenues for this purpose, which I personally don't think is a problem, or I don't think Senator Tony does, but I just don't want to get in trouble for
Yeah,
making
and
that
I don't
commitment
presume
when I don't
to
have the
speak
authority.
on behalf of a body that is ruled by the majority, and it's any 8 senators minimum. So this
If-
is just a proposal, and if you're okay with it, maybe
Yeah.
we can talk about it. And
I'll
we'll
certainly
see if
take
we're
it
okay
back
with it.
immediately after this this hearing, Senator.
Or maybe a recess, because I think it might just be resolved by a quick phone call. You've been able to do a lot of good things, Chris.
I'll make a phone call
Madam Speaker,
if that's
can we
the will of the body.
take a recess?
I actually think we could, first of all.
Sorry if there's no
nobody has
other
any
senator wishing to speak.
Okay, we're going to take a recess.
So you want to find out? I mean, is that going to be amenable by the? You got,
Committee of the Whole is back to order. Okay, the Committee of the Whole is back in session. I believe that the two members, two former colleagues of ours, yes, have left. And there was nobody on the list who wanted to ask any questions or make any comments. So, Senator Respicia, where are you? Okay, so Senator, the Assistant Majority Leader, then, a motion then to rise? What was the, well, but we can't do anything until they said they would code. Oh, there he is. So, well, that's because we didn't hear anything. There are no other questions unless somebody else has a question. Okay, then Senator Respicio. We can stay in recess then until tomorrow morning at 9.
Well, Madam Speaker, prior to the recess, I engaged the two administration officials regarding a solution, and they were supposed to get back with us. And I think if there's any opportunity to move on that suggestion, then these bills would have to be amended in the Committee of the Whole, and then because once we rise, that no further amendments cannot be made. So either we.
So I think the best thing would be is to.
I think they're still here, though. They're still here.
So we're going to continue to be in recess then until we hear then from the front office. Okay.
At least for 10 minutes or whichever is sooner.
Okay.
So we don't recess indefinitely.
So let's make it a time certain then for 10 minutes at least, and then we would know, engage it, and know where we're going to go. Okay, we'll recess.
At least it's not 10 months.
Legislature's back in session. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of all of us here, I just want to thank the two representatives of the governor, Senator Duenas, former Senator Duenas and former Senator Blas, governor's liaison for legislative affairs, and you have a very long title, Chris, and so I want to be sure I recognize that, and also our Director of Administration. So thank you for your participation, and after, if it's okay, if you're dismissed, then the body will stay back to make some amendments, if any, to the bill. But your guidance is certainly duly noted and appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, members.
Is your title longer than yours?
Mr. Majority Leader.
No, it's their bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. Given the discussion that we had with the administration officials with respect to the 7 bills that are the Committee of the Whole, at this time I probably think that the sponsors of the bill would like to offer an amendment that encompasses what we just discussed and as a possible way out to move these 7 initiatives forward based on the governor's concerns as well as the desire of all of us here, including the administration, to want to realize all the appropriations in these 7 bills.
Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I beg your indulgence on this, and recognizing that, it's probably unprecedented that we were able to committee the whole for 7 bills, and I would appreciate that we have the opportunity to be able to address each bill individually if necessary. I think it's going to be necessary because there are some discussions that need to occur. At least in my mind, I would like to be able to further some discussions on a couple of bills.
Well, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. We would address each bill one by one, and any amendments made would have to be made to each bill individually and voted on individually. It wouldn't just be one blanket amendment for all the bills.
So, yeah.
It would be, yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So are the authors ready to make those presentations, or would you wish to recess until the morning?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just for sake of consistency, and I certainly hope I understand the request, but obviously regurgitating the same amendment repeatedly, I guess I will have to, based on each legislation. So we're looking at Bill number 153-33 LS, and on line 3, to delete the words appropriated from the initial savings realized in fiscal year 2015 pursuant to Public Law 33-0602. Delete those words and replace it with authorized from the general fund to be allocated to, and then it will continue to read, to the Department of Administration for the purposes of funding the construction of the Fallen Heroes Monument. So once again, the entire provision would read, or let me repeat that again, to delete the words on line 3, appropriated from, and delete the entire line 4, and replace it with authorized from the general fund to be allocated to the Department of it, and then continue with the entire paragraph. So it would read, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the sum of $25,000 is hereby authorized from the general fund to be allocated to the Department of Administration for the purposes of funding the construction of the Fallen Heroes Monument at a designated public location identified by the Fallen Heroes of the Pacific Foundation, Guam.
What is being allocated?
Shouldn't you say general fund fiscal year 2016?
Did you want to recommend that be deleted?
I'm just trying to figure out what allocated means.
Then we can delete that, Mr. Chairman, because you're better versed in regards to financial verbiage. So if you would if this is okay and acceptable to yourself and to our colleagues, it's authorized from the general fund.
Why don't we take a short recess, work with legal counsel to get the wording that you need for this. Legislature's back in session. Senator Dragon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, everyone has a copy on their desks with regards to the revised language that was reviewed by legal counsel.
Yes.
I move for adoption.
Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment after the word authorized, to just add the words for future appropriation. So it will read is authorized for future appropriation. That way it just makes it very clear that this is not an appropriation measure, nor is it an authorization for expenditure without an appropriation.
Just on the proposed amendment, Mr.
Yes.
Speaker, that was shared with the legal counsel. She said it was not necessary, but I have no opposition to the amendment.
All right, so the language, the underlying language will read authorized for future appropriation for the fiscal year 2016 general fund. Is that correct, Senator Nicholas? On this,
I have a question.
Senator
So
Adams?
maybe if the mover of that amendment to the amendment, is it correct then to interpret that to mean that, authorized for future appropriation? It's only this body that can appropriate. So it means that we're authorized to come back here again at a later date to then go through the appropriation action. That's all we're really saying. When, on that day that the administration comes back and says, we have a surplus and we are flush with cash. That's basically what we're saying. Is that about right?
It's not that foreign. All legislative bodies have authorizations before appropriations.
I understand.
And
But
so-
because we're the only ones that can appropriate, that means that we have to come back here again and basically introduce the same thing that now says we appropriate $25,000. That's all. It's going to take us full circle.
Yeah, yes, and that is supposed to be the authorization and appropriation process in civics class from 7th grade.
But the only thing that's missing is that then we come back here to appropriate when the administration informs us that we have surplus cash. Because when we passed the budget, every penny was pretty much... Did I miss that in civics class too?
The problem is that this Guam legislature has for years, for decades, neglected the difference between authorizations and appropriations. The U.S. Congress has hearings in February for the authorization committees. Authorization committees then authorize whatever they want. But it's not until September that the Appropriations Committee says, yes, DOD authorized to be expended $37 trillion. We're only going to appropriate $34 million because that's all that we have. And that's the process that should have been. But for some reason, this legislature before I got here has not been willing to do that. And now we're starting to do that, to recognize that there's an authorization process first before an appropriation. And I was very thankful that on the 30th of July, the governor finally acknowledged that an authorization requires a separate appropriation hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Just to, I guess, to clarify, and again, I understand what you just said in terms of what the U.S. Congress does. In February, they do the authorization, and they come back in September, and then they they do the appropriations then, right before the fiscal year. The way this one reads is authorized for future appropriation from fiscal year 2016. This is kind of a different situation then, because we're authorizing, we're authorizing for future appropriation for the fiscal year that we're in right now. So this is a little bit different from process that you just described. Is that correct?
Technically, yes, that there should have been a
So
that
the
it's
previous,
not-
yeah, I'm just making a point. So the previous speaker, the point he was trying to make was that, you know, we would have to come here back again during this fiscal year, right, to make
if
appropriations
there is
for
more
this.
money, yes.
Right, if there is more money. So the answer is yes, I guess.
Anything else, Senator Uggan?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if that amendment was adopted, but also I was going to move for the deletion of lines 11 and 12. Which reads, the appropriation in this section shall not lapse and shall remain available.
Is there any objection to the First Amendment as amended? Authorized for future appropriation from the fiscal year 2016 general fund.
My amendment to the amendment has not been gavelled yet.
Yeah, he's asking what that was. I was just.
After the word authorize, add for future appropriation.
Senator Blasi, do you have any further questions?
I appreciate the amendment as being proffered. Mr. Speaker, it just sits. I'm very uncomfortable. Because then, like you had stated, this body has neglected for decades what should have been the process. What is understood by the community is basically once this is passed, this is good as gold, when it is in fact not. And quite honestly, if it's going to be based on future appropriations or future revenues gained by the general fund, there was the whole conversation with Senator Dueñas when he was here of the possibility of the governor wanting us to come back and prioritize first those appropriations or those measures that could not have been appropriated in the budget that we had passed to the tune of $30-some-odd million. So I guess my concern here is, what are we telling the community?
I think
point
what
of order,
we're
Mr.
telling
Chairman.
the community is that, unfortunately, when we had the public hearing, it was going to be an appropriation from a savings of $3360 in the bond refund that was going to be the source of funds. That money no longer exists. The question is, are we going to accept this authorization now that has never had a public hearing on the use of 2016 general funds?
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing, and I appreciate the proffer of the amendment. It's just the whole exercise that we're going through here.
I think the problem is that the original hearing had a source of funds.
Right.
This bill did not have a hearing to use money from 2016 budget. So, I mean, I'm chairing. I'm not going to make the motion that it's complete, that you can't do that because it never had a hearing. If 8 of you want to move forward, that's 8 of you that want to move forward. I'm just saying it never had a hearing to use 2016 funds. The public hearing that I conducted was to use $1.5 million in savings from the bond refund.
Thank you. And along those lines, Mr. Speaker, and I recognize this, and I just, you know what, you know, when you've got a measure here that has very good merit, you know, and if the funding source was available, it's a great thing to be able to fund. And I share your same concern, and I recognize that because of where you're at, you can't make that proper motion. I'm going to implore, beg, please, for the sake of not losing this, and for the sake of not, for lack of a better term, deceiving the community, but for saving the spirit and the intent of what this legislation is, I'm asking us, let's put the brakes on this first, before we even go further. Let's put the brakes on this. You know, because adding more words to this is not going to bring the fact that it's going to get passed or that it's going to happen. It could get passed by 8 people, but it's not going to happen. Let's be honest.
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair, point of personal privilege.
State your personal.
Just to clarify and just to make it very, very, very clear for the record and for the listening audience, my amendment is in no way deceiving anybody, and my amendment is in no way doing something that's not going to happen. I'm actually trying to tighten up against those kind of perceptions by saying we need to come back and appropriate the money. I'd appreciate if the current speaker, if he wanted to speak to those things, would speak to the main motion rather than to my amendment, because the perceptions that are being created are that somehow my amendment is going to be doing that, and it doesn't do that.
And
my
Speaker?
my amendment, Madam Speaker, says that we have to come back for a future appropriation.
And
so that's why I'm introducing it, because I'm trying my very best to make sure that there are no misperceptions out there, that it's very clear in the language that we're going to have to come back and actually appropriate the money for this, because this original authorization without this language does not make the money automatically available. And so I would appreciate it if the current speaker, if he's going to be speaking to whether or not there are any certainties, would actually reserve that for the main motion rather than for my amendment to the amendment, because my amendment to the amendment doesn't do any of that. It actually tries to be more transparent.
And in all due respect, Madam Speaker, I preface my response by saying I had no qualms and I had no, with regards to his amendment. This is not directed toward him or toward what he intended. It's directed toward this body is attempting to do. He proffered an amendment that's being talked about, and I'm bringing my concern as a whole. Now, maybe he's right. Maybe I should have done this maybe sooner or maybe later. But it's being done. And again, I have no issue with his, and I appreciate the amendment that he proffered, because yes, it does bring some certainty to it. But but the bigger picture, the larger picture, is what we're doing and what could possibly happen. And that's what I was speaking to. So for the record, I stand in support of his amendment. I'm not talking about him or his character or what his intent was to be. But I am concerned with regards to where we're going and what is going to happen to this bill as a whole. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Welcome, Senator. On the amendment, to the amendment, Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just for clarification, and I certainly appreciate the Chair of Appropriation and his sharing his perspective. Concerns have been raised about whether, in fact, we're going to give people false hope. And let me preface my statement by saying this. When this body passed an authorization in Public Law 33-60 that says certain amount of money realized shall hereby be reserved, specifically set aside and authorized for future appropriations, this body honored that statement prior to the conclusion of fiscal year 15. We set precedents by including that authorization in that legislation, and the good chair of appropriation recognized that and incorporated that as part of his fiscal year 2016 budget. What we are doing is we are bookmarking. We're not making empty promises, or at least I am not sitting here with a proposal that has my name and saying we're making an empty promise. No. The commitment was from representatives from the governor's office and from the executive branch that should revenues increase, that they support the authorization at this time, and then when they come back with their proposal to revisit the budget with the support and assistance of the chair of appropriation, then these will be items that will be incorporated and considered. What we are doing here is bookmarking and recognizing, and all of us agree that there are some very good projects that will be funded as a result of this, but I'm using the term by Senator Duenas from the governor's office, who said, use the term bookmarking. We are bookmarking any additional revenues to be allocated specifically to address these concerns. Now, if we don't support that concept and we don't want to come back in 6 months, then don't support the amendment, Madam Speaker. But that's what we're doing, and we have set precedents. We had set precedents in August by providing an authorization, and eventually we met that commitment as a body. And I'm asking everyone here to recognize where these resources, should additional revenues come in, that at least we can commit to our people that these are items that would be considered, notwithstanding any other perhaps more urgent issues that may arise once we revisit the budget. Because I recognize that those situations certainly come up. So, Madam Speaker, I ask our colleagues to consider this amendment, these legislative measures, and let's proceed with the previous question, please, Ms.
Mr. Vice Speaker, you are recognized.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. In the past, previous appropriation chairs have insisted that if you're going to have an appropriation above the current year budget, that you have to find something in the current year budget that you're going to take that money from. On this bill, as it relates to the War Memorial, I understand that there is a need to try to get this passed this session so that hopefully it'll be signed before November the 11th. In an effort to try to show how that can be done, I am willing to offer $25,000 from my office budget to be appropriated directly to this one.
Need to take a recess. The legislature is back in session. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just a couple of minutes away from 5, and I know there's a lot of discussion that's going on, so we're going to recess until tomorrow morning at 9.